So let's get to these 9 candidates now with full context that I'm describing them to you, not trying to persuade you one way or the other on these folks. There's just things I think you need to know. So alphabetical order, let's start with Jack Bergman. Jack Bergman is the highest ranking member of the military to have ever served in Congress in America's history. General Bergman served in the United States Marine Corps. Now, he's a more moderate member of Congress. He's from the state of Michigan, represents the Upper Peninsula there. He was actually elected class president when I entered Congress. So several of the people that you're going to hear about, or certainly Mike Johnson, I guess, in addition to Bergman, from the same class that was elected with me in 2016, Jack Bergman was elected our class president, always viewed well among the members of our class. Member of the Armed Services Committee with me, has also served as a member of the Veterans Affairs Committee. Now, one thing about Jack Bergman, he voted for the debt limit increase. That is in many ways the original sin of the McCarthy era of the speakership. Before that debt limit vote, Kevin McCarthy was actually doing a pretty good job as House Speaker. Wouldn't have lost his job. But when they did the deal to underwrite an unlimited amount of Biden debt through January 1 of 2025, you created this runway for the very weaponized government that we have been fighting against. So I will certainly weigh in my decision the fact that Jack Bergman was a yes vote on that bad debt limit deal. I think that we probably would do better with someone who didn't vote for that. And that brings us to our next candidate for Speaker, Byron Donalds, my fellow Florida man. So I am a little biased. Byron and I have known each other for quite some time. We've been on the campaign trail together throughout Florida politics, helping Republicans get elected. We served in the state legislature together. Byron Donalds is a respected member of the House Freedom Caucus. He is a dynamic communicator. In one area where he and I had disagreement, and it was re-noted on social media somewhat recently, Byron had supported a continuing resolution that demanded some policy changes on the border and that had ostensibly some spending cuts for 30 days. I did not support that. I think governing by continuing resolution is a bad idea. But Byron is considered probably, among the more conservative members of this field and someone who certainly got a lot of people excited. I know, having campaigned with Byron across Florida, throughout the country, he's a very dynamic guy, and when people interact with him on the campaign trail, they seem to like him. So Byron Donalds, another candidate for House Speaker. The real question I had with Donalds, he's in his second term, I think? Second or third term. I think he's in his second term. And there are some here who believe that you've got to have extensive seniority. You've got to have been in Washington for 10, 12 years to even be considered. Frankly, all the people we've considered to date have had at least a decade of experience in Congress, and Byron has less congressional experience. But I would remind people that he's got experience in the state legislature, and one of the features of his candidacy that I think he's been promoting is that he's not been entirely encapsulated in the Beltway view of thinking, and that as someone who's a former state lawmaker, like many members of Congress are, we might be able to reset that semblance of federalism, where the Congress doesn't have to solve every problem, where we've got states doing what's within their constitutional purview. So that is Byron Donalds. Next, alphabetically, Tom Emmer. He is the current whip of the Republican conference, and in that role, he is very well thought of, from our more moderate members to our more conservative members, as a truth teller. Tom Emmer is one of the few members of leadership who doesn't lie to the membership. There is a Trump factor here. President Trump initially put out a statement that he did not support Tom Emmer. He'd apparently heard things that were concerning to him about how Tom Emmer had run the campaign arm of the Republican caucus, the NRCC. I am told that President Trump and Tom Emmer spoke over the weekend and that conversation went well. So we'll see if there are other comments from President Trump about Tom Emmer. Though Tom Emmer is the whip of the Congress, it is important to note that Emmer has only been in that position for 9 months, whereas other members of leadership at times struggled with members who said, well, you're part of the same system, you're part of the same structure, and some had been members of that system and structure for many years. Here, Tom Emmer has been there for 9 months. I think the membership likes him. Now, there have been some clips that have been coming out from his time as a Minnesota based politician, lawmaker. I think he ran for governor in Minnesota, came up just short in the closest of races there as Minnesota was taking kind of a bluish turn. You could find old clips about just about anybody and use them if they've been in politics long enough. We'll see if those motivate a lot of conservative activists to oppose Emmer. I certainly have seen the most opposition to Emmer online as opposed to any of these other candidates. We'll see if that ends up being dispositive for folks. And another thing you should know about Tom Emmer, he too voted for the debt limit deal. So if you're viewing that as dispositive as I am, if you're viewing that as critical to where the House of Representatives is right now, it's quite the tell Tom Emmer was a yes vote on the bad McCarthy debt limit deal. That brings us to our next candidate, Kevin Hearn. Kevin Hearn is the chairman of the Republican Study Committee. That is the largest conference in the United States Congress. And Kevin Hearn is a guy who grew up on public assistance, got a job at a McDonald's, scraped together enough money to get a McDonald's franchise, and then became one of the most successful McDonald's franchisees in the country. And as it just so happens, I have a delivery from Kevin Hearn that came just as we were starting the show, and I'll read you his platform. He's a congressman from Arkansas, and it reads, actually, is he from he's from Oklahoma, isn't he? Yeah, Oklahoma, my mistake. All right. Dear colleague, how would you get us back on track? That is the question I've received most since announcing my bid for Speaker. To me, the answer is simple. If we want better outcomes, we need to pursue a fresh approach. But truth is, Congress has not been working properly for a long time. Here are some facts. 38. That's the number of continuing resolutions we've passed in the last 10 years. 8. That's the number of omnibus spending bills we've passed in the last 10 years. 1977, the last and only time Congress passed a budget and enacted all of its appropriations bills separately and on time. Think about that. 1977, last time we followed the law. But I'm the crazy one that wants us to follow the law. Back to Hearn's letter. 1,208, the number of unauthorized programs at the beginning of fiscal year 2023. We've talked a lot about this. Over 1,200 unauthorized programs. We've got to stop spending money in this way. So back to the Hearn letter. 2, the number of years we are away from debt interest payments surpassing annual defense funding. And the letter goes on to talk about the number of Americans that are dying from the national debt, the debt increase now approaching $34 trillion, and an approval rating for Congress of 17%. Hearn talks about his 35 years of leadership in the McDonald's organization, motivating people, and you know what? Let's see what he sent us. A cheeseburger. Actually, we got 2 of them. And, they say there's a lot of stuff that goes on to buy and sell votes in this town, but Kevin Hearn sending me a McDonald's burger, probably one of the best efforts we've had so far. I'm taking a bite. Oh, it's been a long time since I've had a McDonald's burger. All right, that's Kevin Hearn's candidacy. We'll see if anybody else sends any other fast food. That brings us to the next candidate, Mike Johnson. Mike Johnson, a constitutional conservative, a brilliant attorney, whips Jamie Raskin up and down the floor whenever they debate the finer points of constitutional law. On the Judiciary Committee, Mike Johnson has been central to a lot of the oversight we've been conducting over the Biden crime family, over the FBI, the DOJ, the ATF. Here is the challenge that Mike Johnson will have to overcome. He did not vote for the debt limit deal, but the challenge he'll have to overcome is that he's from the state of Louisiana. And our number 2 right now, Steve Scalise, who withdrew from the speaker contest, is also from Louisiana. So I know this sounds crazy, but as qualified as Mike Johnson is, and he would make a phenomenal speaker, I can tell you that right now, having worked with him. There are some people who don't want to vote for Mike Johnson because they're concerned about the centralization of power with a Speaker of the House and a majority leader from the state of Louisiana. I don't view that as all that important, but it's something he's going to have to work through. Also, Mike Johnson's not a member of the House Freedom Caucus. A lot of times he aligns with the conservative perspective and viewpoint. Some members of the Freedom Caucus say, well, if you're a real conservative that wants our backing, you should be in the Freedom Caucus. Full disclosure, I'm not a member of the Freedom Caucus. I think that you can be a conservative and be more independent-minded, or you don't have to necessarily be a sworn-in member of the House Freedom Caucus in order to fight for the American people. Mike Johnson's going to be a really strong candidate for the speakership. Next is Dan Muser. Dan Muser's from Pennsylvania. He is more, I think, drawing on a base of suburbanite Republicans to support his candidacy. He supported the debt limit deal. And, you know, he's going to make a case that someone from a swing state like Pennsylvania, someone who can make a case to country club Republicans would be helpful. That'll be the central candidacy of Dan Muser. Next, it brings us to Gary Palmer. Gary Palmer is currently the policy chairman. He's viewed within the Republican conference as someone who is wonky, who understands the intricacies of policy choices. He studies budget issues and entitlement issues very closely. I served on the budget committee with Gary Palmer. I can tell you this guy is a fiscal hawk. He's from the state of Alabama. So, hey, if we went from a House Speaker from California to a House Speaker from Alabama, that has its own panache to it. I think he understands how to reform entitlement programs. He is a devout Christian and more of a mild-mannered guy. Gary Palmer, he played wide receiver at the University of Alabama, was quite the standout athlete, a pretty fast guy we hear, but he's not the person to take over a room with his mere presence. I think he's more of a student of the intricacies of policy, more mild-mannered in his nature. Next up is Pete Sessions of Texas. And Pete Sessions is a bit of a throwback candidate, prior chairman of the House Rules Committee under House Speaker Paul Ryan. And he was really ousted from that Rules Committee seniority and that Rules Committee position under Kevin McCarthy. So he and McCarthy do not get along particularly well. Pete Sessions will draw heavily on the fact that he's from the largest delegation for Republicans in the country. That's the Texas delegation. If all of the Texans get behind Pete Sessions, I think he's got a really high probability of coming out of the gate with a strong base of support. And he'll make the argument that just like the Texas delegation, the Republican conference has more conservatives, more suburbanites, more centrists, more moderates. So if he could convince that delegation to support him, he would likely argue that that would allow him to bring in people from the various factions of our conference to be able to lead us effectively. That is the Pete Sessions case from Texas, former Rules Chairman. That brings us to our final candidate, Austin Scott. Austin Scott from the state of Georgia. You'll remember he challenged Jim Jordan, got 81 votes in that contest. I praised Austin Scott online because after he was defeated by Jim Jordan, he backed him 100% for Speaker, voted for him 3 times, was working hard to get the gavel for Jordan. And I just think that's a class act. It's a total, I think, responsible thing to do after someone bests you in a contest like that, to back them. He is running on a campaign that includes consequences for the 8 of us who did not support Kevin McCarthy, including yours truly. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee and the Agriculture Committee. He voted for the debt limit deal that many of us oppose. Thanks so much for watching this video. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel with notifications turned on. You won't want to miss any of the breaking news.